Hello, everyone. We are going to let everyone have just one more minute to get logged in and then we'll get started today. All right, it looks like we're getting the rest of our participants going in, so we're going to get started. Hello and welcome to our Condemnation 101 webinar. My name is Francesca Bridwell and I run the marketing for Braun Gresham. Our attorneys leading today's presentation are Patrick L. Reznik and Carly Barton. At Braun Gresham, we represent clients across the entire state of Texas, and we exclusively represent landowners. The state of Texas is our map that represents all of our practice areas that we have here at our firm. We have over 15 attorneys on our team, and we represent clients in all facets of land ownership, as you can see on our map here, from estate planning to renewable energy, conservation easements, and of course, condemnation. Before I turn it over to Patrick and Carly to introduce themselves to get us started today, I'm going to give you an overview of how to submit questions. To access, move your cursor over the screen and you'll see the toolbar pop up either on the top or the bottom of your screen. On the toolbar, you'll see a Q&A symbol. If you press that, a pop-up box will open. No one can see your pop-up box and no one can see your questions except for the moderators. And we'll be answering questions throughout the presentation today, so please feel free to pop them in at any time. And then after today's presentation, we'll follow up with a recording and an email to connect you with our team. And thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Reznik. I'm an attorney with Braun Gresham for a number of years, and I represent landowners all over the state. A little background on me: I was born and raised in Texas. Supposed to be reared, but in North Texas, Amarillo, Lubbock areas, we call it raised. And so I love Texas. I've worked all over the state, from the Rio Grande Valley to East Texas to West Texas, El Paso. When I got out of law school, I worked for a federal judge in Midland, Texas. I love representing landowners around the state exclusively and really enjoy my clients, helping them out through the stresses of this condemnation process. And we are always available for you for a free consultation to discuss whatever issues you may have, regardless whether it's condemnation. There's a lot of transmission lines that are be coming around the state, these 765 kilovolt transmission lines. We represent our clients to try to keep those lines off their property if that's what the clients want. So thank you so much. We look forward to this presentation this afternoon. I'll turn it over to Carla.
Good afternoon. My name is Carly Barton. I'm another attorney at Braun Gresham. Been here about 7 years, but I and Patrick consist of the two attorneys that are on our condemnation team. Our team is rounded out by Audrey Banner, who is our paralegal, and April Soloway. So together we are the condemnation team at Braun Gresham. We are the ones that landowners turn to when they need help and need advice about condemnation, and together we bring lots of experience on many projects and many types of projects all over the state. As Patrick mentioned, we represent clients all across the state, not just in around Dripping Springs where our offices are based. So we have a wide variety of types of condemnations, types of clients, and in the different regions. First, we're going to start off with a little bit of background about what is condemnation and what is eminent domain. So first, those terms are used interchangeably pretty frequently. And so to kind of talk a little bit about what they are, eminent domain is actually the power. It is the power of the government to come and take your land for a public purpose with just compensation. So that is just the term of art, the legal term for the power the government has. They have the power of eminent domain. Condemnation is the actual process. Condemnation is the process in which the government exercises its power of eminent domain. And so those are the two. They're used interchangeably. We even use them interchangeably, but that is actually technically the difference in them. And when we're talking about the right for the government to come in and take your land, we also are talking about the right of a private company or private party to come and take your land if they've been authorized by the government. That's how we see big utility companies building transmission lines, transmission electrical lines. That's how we see oil and gas companies building pipelines. They've been authorized by the government and by statute to use eminent domain in order to construct infrastructure. And so that's where we see private companies coming in and also using that power of eminent domain. But why should it matter, right? Why should it matter to you? There are many reasons why it matters, and not just to landowners, although of course the threat of eminent domain and the threat of a condemnation is very real and has lots of consequences to landowners. But in general, we're talking about what the land in Texas has to be burdened with the infrastructure. And as a growing state, we see that landowners are increasingly being asked to carry that burden. And our job as condemnation attorneys for landowners is to ease that burden and protect you as best as we can and as best as the law allows. So things that is important to stay educated about as a landowner in Texas and potentially facing a condemnation lawsuit: the loss of your property, right? There might be taking a chunk of your property or an easement of your property and restricting your rights to use it. Ensuring that you get fair compensation, that when the right-of-way agent comes around, that you're not just signing the first offer that you get. Like I mentioned, there's rapid growth in Texas, so there are lots and lots of projects that have the ability to come and condemn to support their projects: roads, pipelines, transmission lines, water lines. We've seen a growth in all of that in recent years. It's important to understand the process so you know what to expect, right? It's like the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting, what to expect when you're going through condemnation. And that's what we're going to cover in this presentation as well. But also, to know the resources available for you, that you can seek legal advice at the right time so that you have trusted and educated professionals who know what they're doing, and that also there are other important professionals that can help you through a condemnation process, such as an appraiser or an engineer or a land planner that come into the process as well. The condemnation procedure in Texas, it's governed by Chapter 21 of the Texas Property Code. And we're going to go through those stages and how those stages are outlined, but that is how your property can be taken by a governmental entity or a private company. Now, one of the most important inquiries that you're going to ask about a condemnation proceeding or the threat of condemnation is that it must be for a public purpose, right? It cannot be for just financial gain for one person. It has to serve one company. It has to serve a public purpose. It has to have a public good. For example, we have our large energy companies in the state of Texas. Well, those companies, yes, they are private companies and they will, they're in the business of making money, right? So they will receive profit and things like that from the infrastructure they build. However, they are also, when they build these transmission lines, the government has authorized them to do so on the basis that these transmission lines are needed for our electrical grid and to serve the public with electricity. That is how you get private companies having that eminent domain power and that authority. They get that authority from the government. In Texas, you cannot just condemn a property to enhance tax revenues or foster economic development. That has been outlawed and is not supported in the Texas Constitution. So they can't just come in and condemn your property just because they want a developer to come in and build something a lot nicer. In the past, that has been the case, but like I said, there's been some changes and more recent legal history about that. When we talk about condemnation and eminent domain, the state of Texas has what they call the Landowners' Bill of Rights. This is a document that the legislature has required condemning authorities to provide to landowners when they're facing a condemnation proceeding. And so these have important rights that are protected, that you are protected for, and that you can see right, number one, right off the bat, that you're entitled to receive adequate compensation in your property if your property is taken for a public use, right? So if the government is going to come in and take your property, you need to receive adequate compensation. It needs to be there to make you as whole as possible. It can only be taken for a public use, right? It can't be to line someone else's pockets, right? And so the Landowner Bill of Rights has many pages and has some more information about the things that you are afforded as a landowner in Texas, that you have those protections in the Constitution and Chapter 21 of the Texas Property Code. And so we touched on adequate compensation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to say, what is this and how do we define it in a condemnation proceeding?
Let's talk about money. That is always an issue. And when we talk about adequate compensation, whether it's under the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution or the Texas Constitution or the Texas Property Code, here's where a big discrepancy comes in. The condemning authority, believe it or not, has a different idea of what adequate or the amount of compensation that you should receive. Oftentimes, their number is much lower than what we believe that you should have been entitled to. Now, if it's an easement, you also have the easement terms that we'll also negotiate. If it's a taking where the company is going to own it, or TxDOT's going to own it, or city or county is going to own a road extension or something like that, there's no easement. But the easement terms are also really important. And the type of compensation that you are going to receive also depends on whether it's a taking of your property that they're going to own in fee, or there's going to be a deed eventually, or whether or not there is an easement. Our expertise comes into play when we look at what the offer is being made and whether we think it's a good, adequate compensation. Right now, there's a new pipeline that's going on around the state of Texas. This particular company is actually offering good money to acquire an easement. So we're really focusing on what are the easement terms on that particular project, not so much the compensation, because what they're offering is, in our opinion, a good and adequate compensation. That does not happen very often. So we look at what the offer is, we look at what their appraisal is, and decide what is the value of what's being taken. And that's a term of art in condemnation, because this is not a buy sale. A lot of times, especially cities and other organizations that have eminent domain authority, like to say, well, we're going to buy your property. No, I am a very big stickler. They're not buying, you're not selling, they're taking under the eminent domain authority that they have to actually condemn. So we look at the value of what they're being taken, and we look at also the remainder. This red part, it could be a road, it could be an easement, it could be any number of things, a transmission line easement, a water line easement, a pipeline, a gas line easement. But we look at the value of what's being taken and also what are the impacts to the remaining portion of the property. If you have a water well, for example, in the part being taken, there's value to that. If you have a gate entrance in the part that's being taken, and that beautiful rock entrance with a big iron gate and ornaments, around it are being taken, what's the value of that and what's the replacement cost of that? Also, depending on the project, is there impact to the rest of the value of the property? Because we look at the whole property before the taking and then the whole property after the taking. That is something that is an appraisal methodology. A lot of times the companies who are condemning or the government who's condemning look at this very isolated and to the least amount of compensation that their appraisers can do. Appraisal methodology is absolutely an art form. It's not an exact science. And so I'm going to show you an example where our appraiser had a very different opinion of the value of adequate compensation as compared to what the government and TxDOT in this case believed. But what we look at is the total value of the property before the taking and then after. In this example, this was a business that was being taken by TxDOT north of San Antonio, Texas. Their business was being taken out, and their land, which was high value frontage property, was also being taken. So we looked at the whole market value of the building and the land, and the market value of the land was 2.8, almost $2.9 million. The improvements, the business, the facilities that were being destroyed and taken were roughly $1.8, $1.9 million for a total of not compensation, but the total value before the taking of around $4.7 million. They took the building, so it has no value after that. They took land, which diminishes the rest of the property. So when we looked at the market value of the remaining piece of property without the buildings, it was only 1.1, 1.1, 1.4. And then they were taking also an easement. It was a temporary easement, not a permanent easement. So we put a value on that. So in our opinion, in our appraisal, based on also a building estimator and also a land planner, so we had three experts on this case, was $3.6 million in damages. TxDOT was a little over 1 million. So we were actually $2 million apart. We got the case settled and the client was very, very happy. But you can see if the landowner just took what TxDOT was offering without this additional analysis that we provided, they were going to leave a couple $1 million on the table. That's significant money.
So now we're going to talk about the stages of condemnation and what you can expect when if a condemnation project is going to be affecting your land. So the first part is project planning and the public use determination. That is your government officials usually talking about where the road is going to go, maybe having some open houses and deciding that it is needed. Then the second step is initial contact and offer. Third is the bona fide offer and negotiation. Fourth is a final offer letter. And fifth is filing of a condemnation petition or a condemnation lawsuit. So for step one, this is when the entity identifies a need for land for a certain public project, right? A road, a pipeline, a transmission line, things like that. At this point, right, this is when you're talking about a road, a lot of times there are, vague notions of we need a road in this area. Where is that road going to be? How wide is it going to be? What are the traffic counts? Information like that, right? They're trying to plan out what it should look like and that it is needed for the public purpose. So then after that project planning has happened, the entities have decided and figured out more specifically what those exact parameters are, right? How much of an easement they might need, how much of a taking they might need. Then it moves on to initial contact and offer. Many times when the initial contact happens, that is when a right-of-way agent or a real estate person contacts the landowner and says, hey, we want to get on your property to survey, or we want to get on your property to appraise. Many times, this is the first time landowners even realize that their property is slated for condemnation, that they are being affected by this project. Because unless you are following in close detail your city council or your county commissioner's minutes and hearings, you might not know that there is an infrastructure project coming your way. And there are many, many entities across the state of Texas that do have condemning authority. So sometimes it's just, you're not aware until they start knocking. That initial contact, like I said, typically comes from someone reaching out, you receiving a letter saying, I want to get on your property to survey, because they're getting ready. They want to make sure they know where the bounds are for the taking, and preparing to make an offer. I want to be really clear. Entities with condemning authority in Texas, they can come on your property. And so while you might not want them to come on immediately, or you want them to come on at a specific time, they do have the right to get on your property for surveying and appraising and those things for a condemnation proceeding. Yes, you can tell them no, but only for so long, because if you refuse them totally and completely, then they will go to the court. They'll get a temporary restraining order to get access onto your property. But at this point, this is usually a pretty good time to reach out to an attorney, because that is when the negotiation and the whole legal process really kicks off. And it is the first part. you can do to protect your land. When we're talking about that initial contact and that right of entry, many times it's just a form they want you to fill out, give you some information, and there's nothing really in there that protects the landowner. There's no real good liability protections, no notice provisions. And so at that point, it is a time where a lawyer can step in and say, hey, yes, you can get on my client's property, but we're going to limit you in some more serious ways. And we're going to make sure that you're giving us notice, and we're going to make sure that you're liable for any damages that occur. We're going to make sure that they're going to lock those gates and make sure that they have insurance and things like that. That is why initial contact usually is a really good time to reach out and consult with a lawyer, because at this point, we know that with pretty good certainty, the vast majority of the time, you are going to be condemned. The next step is the bona fide offer and negotiation. So a bona fide offer is also a term of art. It comes from Chapter 21 of the Texas Property Code, but means a fair attempt to negotiate in good faith, right? That they are trying to give you what they believe is just compensation or adequate compensation in their eyes. As Patrick noted, that is very different many times, right? And depending on the entity that you're dealing with, they're going to have a very different perspective on what that adequate compensation is. And so that bona fide offer additionally also comes with a appraisal. And so you will receive an appraisal from the condemning authority. They're required to under the law. And that appraisal will have, it shows their appraiser's opinion and how they came up with that number in the offer that you received. So you can accept it, you can reject it, you can counter offer them, you can do what you please. However, if an agreement isn't reached, then we keep going through those stages of condemnation as we move forward.
Carly is working you through this process. It is a process that has to be followed by the Chapter 21 of the Texas Property Code. And that requires a 30-day offer. A lot of times our clients are really panicked because they get this offer and they said, you have 30 days to respond. That is by law that they have to do that. So we look at that and go, well, there's no need to really respond. You can tell them, no, that's not enough. We need more time. A lot of our clients feel like in a panic mode because it's a very stressful process. And when these deadlines come up, our clients don't know what are the consequences of missing that deadline. These deadlines, again, are required by law. Yes, 30 days. But what that means is they have to at least wait 30 days before they give the final offer. And the final offer is going to have a 14-day response in it. And that's required by law. Obviously, 2 weeks sounds like a very short time period, and it is. But during this process, they also have to provide an appraisal. And we look at that appraisal, and it's usually low as far as the numbers, but oftentimes we look at it and go, here's the problems with that. And if they don't provide that appraisal within the first offer, the initial offer, they do have to provide it in the final offer. That is absolutely required. At this point in time, if you have not consulted with an attorney, an expert such as Braun Gresham, and more particularly Carly or me, you really, really need to, because this is a critical decision for you, for your family, for the land, for the legacy, to make sure that you're doing the right thing. If you're a fiduciary, because the property may be in a trust, you also have a fiduciary responsibility. But whether it's a business owner, whether it's a family owner, or whether it's in a trust or an entity, an LLC, whatever, we need to take a look at that and give you the confidence about what your next step is. Because after the 14 days, the condemning authority can then file what's called the petition and condemnation. And as we move to step 5 of this process, the lawsuit that's going to be filed, yes, it's a lawsuit. And yes, you're going to be sued. I've had some very sophisticated developers that I have told, you will get a lawsuit filed against you. They get sued, whether it's through a process server or through the bail with a green card. you have been sued. But that's, again, part of the process through this condemnation proceedings that goes through the Chapter 21 of the Texas Property Code. For them to be able to take the next step and actually start acquiring what we call possession or reach a settlement, at this stage, if we haven't reached out or an agreement, they have to file the petition and condemnation and start the next administrative part of the process. When I say administrative, when the petition is filed, at that point in time, if you haven't accepted the offer, then the court where the petition is filed will appoint what are called special commissioners. Now, these special commissioners are landowners, resident landowners within the county where the lawsuit is filed. They have nothing to do with the county commissioners or the county judge. That's just what they're called. What is their job? Their job is just to allocate compensation. If there's an easement, because an easement's being taken in addition to, rights under that easement, you're still going to owe the land. But the commissioners have no ability to negotiate the terms of that easement. So if it's a transmission line easement or a gas line easement, for example, you have two buckets. You have the bucket of compensation and you also have the bucket of easement terms. These special commissioners can only allocate the amount of compensation. And when they make that determination, then the condemning authority files that amount of money in the registry of the court. And after they do that, they have what's called possession, which means they can go ahead and start construction. If it's a big pipeline project or transmission line project, they have to have the possession in order to put out bids for the construction for contractors. So they're going to be very aggressive about getting the possession rights in order to go ahead and have their contractors get bids so they have a timing as far as when construction can start. We have cases where we've only settled the case after, for example, the pipeline was in the ground or the transmission line was installed, above the ground, of course. But then we settle on the compensation, and then we also discuss possibly settlement on the easement terms. This is a very complicated process, everyone, and if it's stressful, absolutely. And if you take it lightly, you're not doing you or your land or your family or your as a representative, quite frankly, in your favor, because the condemning authority is really just trying to build the project. They don't have your interest. We only represent landowners. We don't represent condemning authorities. And as landowners, we also feel the pain that you're going through when something's being taken away from you, because part of the stress is that you really have very little control. And a lot of times our clients will say, well, what's the leverage? Again, this is not a buy sell, this is a taking. Your leverage really is limited, but the leverage that you have is our expertise in knowing if you're doing the right thing, what tools are available, whether it's experts or our opinions. Those are tools that provide leverage. And the timing of all of this is also critical because we understand the process, we understand the reality of whether or not the property code is being complied with and what those realistic terms as far as what the timing of the project is going to be. We have those insights and we can advise you as our client about this process and about when the best time is to try to reach a settlement.
So why are Texans concerned about eminent domain or talk about eminent domain reform? We've been experiencing rapid population growth. I live in Hayes County. It's always a top 10 fastest growing county in the entire nation, right? So with that comes lots of infrastructure and growth. And so with the rapid population growth, we have to have the infrastructure to accommodate that. Additionally, there's federal and state funding out there for public projects that are pushing or incentives, economic incentives to invest in these projects. Additionally, we've also seen the growth of energy development in Texas, right? Texas has always been very energy forward with our oil and gas and operations in that industry. However, in the last few decades, that has changed, not just with oil and gas, but as we've grown in our renewables, in our battery storage. We are now seeing the rise of AI data centers and the development of those. They require an insane amount of power, an insane amount of water. And to move that power and water, infrastructure projects come, right? Pipelines and transmission lines come. And so that is something that we will be seeing a lot of in the future. Patrick alluded to it earlier. There are now going to be 765 kilovolt transmission lines in the state of Texas. And if you think about the really big transmission lines you see when you're driving outside your window, those are only 345 kilovolts. So we're talking about doubling the power that they are moving. The structures are wider, they're a little bit taller, but we're going to have some massive power lines throughout the state of Texas that are planned, will be built in a year or so, but are now going through a routing process. So there's 5 of them there's 3 going from I-35 out to West Texas. There's 2 already being routed in West Texas, and then there's 3 that are planned for more East Texas. So they're coming. And so it's important to be not only aware that those projects are coming, but also, are you going to be impacted by it? How can we protect ourselves if we are in the path of one of those infrastructure projects? So what every landowner needs to know about a condemnation procedure, that there has to be a legal basis. The government can seize private land under eminent domain, but it's got to be for a public good. We have seen in situations, if you are familiar with your quasi-governmental entities like your MUDs or your SUDs, those sometimes they are created by developers to put in infrastructure for their developments. And so making sure that that utility district is still doing something for the public good and not a private good is important to know and to be aware of. Is that right? It can't just be for someone's pocketbook. That you have a right to adequate compensation for that difference between the fair market value of your property, the difference between the fair market value of your property with and without that pipeline, road, transmission line. So you want to make sure that you are getting that compensation, right? And so again, making sure it's for a public use and not that they have a valid legal basis. We didn't touch on it too much, but if they don't have part of a condemnation petition and lawsuit, there's 2 real big questions. The first question is, do they have the right to take? And when we say a right to take, we're talking about, is it for public good, right? And that they have a reason for this project. The right to take, and then the second part is adequate compensation. The vast majority of the time, we're arguing about that adequate compensation and making sure you're getting the money that you're deserved under the law. But there are certainly opportunities for a right to take challenge with the right circumstances. Every landowner needs to know about the process, right? That they have to give you an initial offer. And after that 30-day initial offer, they have to give you a final offer. That final offer has to have an appraisal. And so it's important to know about all of these steps in the process because they're very weird, quite honestly, and very different because there are lawyers across the state and who practice law, but there's only a handful that understand this unique part of the law and how Chapter 21 works, and not just what's in the law, but also the dynamics that Patrick discussed about where's our leverage. This isn't a typical real estate transaction, and how to really make sure that you're being properly protected. And you need to know that you do have rights. You have those landowner bill of rights. You have those rights to assert if you think that they are being violated in any way. And then Texas also, of course, you have the right to a jury trial to determine your fair compensation. And so that is also important to know because you will be able to, if the condemning authority really is truly being wholly inadequate in their compensation and not giving you what the appraisal methodologies say, or what is the fair market value, ultimately you can go to a jury of your peers and present evidence before a court to determine what that is. And so those are the things that you should know going into this process in case you are being condemned.
We do have a question. This is perfect timing for an answer to that question. Is we have a participant who's being impacted by the East Texas transmission line. I believe that's probably the 500 kilovolt line that is coming in right now that the Public Utility Commission has recently approved. So it's bigger than what's out there. It's bigger than the 138s. It's bigger than the 345s. It's not as big as the 500 kilovolt lines. And I also see that this participant is being impacted by the Trident line, which is a Kinder Morgan project. We have had multiple clients on that particular line and have been working with Kinder Morgan and their attorneys out of Houston in order to get those cases resolved. And we also have clients on this East Texas line, and Carly can talk more about that particular project. But the question is, should we create a corridor? And the answer is complicated. And as a classic answer, it depends. A corridor is a theory that we often use from an appraisal standpoint. If you have your fifth pipeline, for example, that's coming through and it's going through the middle of your property and you have 100 acres, what can you do with the rest of the property other than possibly graze cattle, maybe grow hay? You can't build on these pipelines. You can't build under the transmission lines. So that land, even though it's an easement, is being very, very limited of how you can use that particular property. So, for example, you couldn't develop a subdivision if there's no room left because you're limited on what you could do on those pipelines and those easements. So the question really is, can you create a corridor? It's possible. I can tell you that the Texas Supreme Court is still working through this issue. So if you do create a corridor and you want to challenge under that theory, you may end up at the Court of Appeals, you may end up at the Texas Supreme Court. The condemning authorities do not like this idea at all because our theory as representative landowners, one pipeline may damage a certain amount, even a second pipeline, but if it's pretty much taking the whole property, then the highest and best use of that land is now for a pipeline or a utility corridor. So you ought to have to pay more. So it's a very controversial issue right now, and be happy to visit with you about that idea and whether your situation is unique in order for us to be able to use that to our advantage. There is a large pipeline that is coming in to East Texas in areas that are so constrained. The real estate is so limited that we are utilizing that corridor theory. And quite frankly, we're doubling and tripling and even more as far as the compensation the landowners are receiving as a result of that. So that again, that's where our expertise comes in. So what is our role? Our role is absolutely to help you understand the process. Make sure that you're not taken advantage of, to make sure that you are making the right decisions for your ownership of the property, however that ownership is. A lot of times I use the example of, can I say, well, dad won't let me do it or mom won't let me do it. We take on that parental role, quite frankly, to help you through this process. And you can always say, you know what, I need to talk to my lawyer because I don't feel comfortable about the pressure that the landman or a person who's trying to get you to sign the documents and take the compensation. And believe it or not, some of the individuals out there who represent the condemning authorities will actually tell you, do not call your lawyer because they're just going to take advantage of you. They're trying to do that, quite frankly, to intimidate you to go ahead and hurry up and sign. We have clients all the time who say, you know what, I want to make sure I'm making the right decision. Let me talk to my lawyer. And you don't even have to use our name. You could just say, I want to talk to my lawyer. So part is reducing the stress. We have children of elderly parents who actually own the property. They're concerned about their parents being taken advantage of. They may be in their 80s or 90s. We come in and we help with the family to relieve that stress. Make sure that you're making the right decision. If we believe that it's economically worth hiring an appraiser and that you're actually going to come out better because there is an expense to hiring an expert, whether it's an appraiser or a land planner, or even a building estimator, those are expenses. What we don't want to do is get you less money in the end or worse terms of the easement if it's going to be an easement. We put that analysis from a risk standpoint and give you the option of so we could go this direction or this direction. At least you're making an informed decision. We also know all the best experts that are out there, all the best appraisers for landowners that are out there. Those relationships that we have are incredibly valuable because we have an excellent reputation. They know if we're involved, the appraiser is going to say, hey, if Patrick or Carly's involved, it must be important. And the reputation that we have around the state against the condemning authorities, whether it's TxDOT, whether it's a pipeline or a transmission line, we know all the attorneys around the state who represent those companies. They know us. They know our expertise. They know we know what we're doing. And I often tell my clients, they don't like me very well because we assert the rights for our clients, the landowners. And I feel good when they say, we don't like Mr. Resnick or Miss Barton because they're going to force us to do our job and to make sure the landowners will be taken care of. So this is a balance of so many components that our expertise comes in. And I'm really passionate. Carly's really passionate about what we do. Our April and Audrey, our team are always there to help answer your questions because believe it or not, after every time you go through a step in this process, you're going to be asking yourself essentially some of the same questions because it is complicated. And we have the patience and expertise to answer those questions, whether it's on the phone, whether it's a Zoom meeting, a Teams meeting, a virtual meeting, in-person meeting on your property, or just a simple phone call or an email. We're here for you, and we really pride ourselves on talking with our clients, communicating with our clients, keeping you informed. We have projects with TxDOT, for example, are 3, 4, 5 years old. We routinely update our clients to let the clients know there's no funding from TxDOT. The project is not going forward right now, but it may in the next period of time, whether it's months or even the next year. So please call us when you have a question. I know one of our participants gave a phone number, and Francesca, if you can make sure we capture that and happily set up a call. So as Patrick Reznik and Carly Barton, we are your advocates for you and your land to make sure your rights are protected, not just in condemnation proceedings, but our firm represents landowners all over the state on all sorts of development issues, real estate issues, and we are litigators. Carly and I are litigators at heart. If you want to go to a jury trial, we're your attorneys to go and charm a jury in your favor. So thank you so much for the opportunity to visit with you this afternoon. Again, here's our phone number, the main number. You can ask for Carly or Patrick or April or Audrey, set up a phone call. You can email me at this email address, email Carly at this email address, and be happy to visit with you and help you through this process. Carly, what else you got?
Just if anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer them. I know it was a lot of information and there's probably only scratched the surface. So if you have any more questions, we're happy to answer and see if there's anything like that. We do have a wonderful newsletter, our Texas Land Advocate. As Patrick said, we represent landowners in all the issues they have with their land, not just condemnation. And so the Texas Land Advocate always has great articles, great information that every single landowner in Texas should know. We won't spam you, and it doesn't come out. It comes out maybe once every 2 weeks or so. You're not going to get 5 emails from Braun Gresham in one time, but we do appreciate y'all taking the time to learn about the condemnation process. And again, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Carly, I want to emphasize this newsletter because it is not a solicitation letter. It's not a solicitation email. We have lots of people who subscribe to this, and they're not even clients because this is such a well-written, and thank you, Francesca, for putting this together on a regular basis. What I really like about it and the feedback I get from our recipients is that it's informative. It may have 2 or 3 links in it. If it's something I'm interested in, I just won't go and dive deeper into that information, but it gives me the opportunity as a landowner to go, I want to know more. And so I really encourage you to go ahead and sign up for that because it's a great service about what their activities are happening, for landowners around the state. When we're in legislative sessions, we keep up with what's going on potential bills and potential things that do go into law that are going to change landowners' rights and possibly even the risk management for the use of their properties. I encourage you to sign up. That we've had feedback for years on how valuable this is. So just a plug to Francesca and our team who helped put that information together, keep it relevant and keep it simple.
Well, thank you, Carly and Patrick, and thank you all so much for joining us today. I don't know about you, but I learned a lot. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we will be uploading this and sharing it with you. So if there's anything that you missed or further questions that you have, we will be emailing this out to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.